come to the wrong place.
Oh, there he is.
Hello, hello.
I was supposed to introduce you, Mark, but okay, fine, be early. I mean,
Well,
be
that's
on
right.
time, be on time.
No, I turned up and I was the only person there. I was just sending messages saying, "Help, I'm in the wrong place," but not. It seems okay. I'm all ready for the off anyway.
Cool. Yeah, you'll get an intro and then Dene will moderate. Peter, I am extremely happy to see you. Can I see your face before you go back to brunch, please? Just like a little peek.
Um,
Is Peter orally there? Can you hear me? Well, if you can.
I don't know if anyone knows. At the moment, when I put my keynote into presentation mode, my other monitor sort of has speaker notes and stuff. So I don't know quite where the Zoom will go because I wasn't able to test that. But
Make sure, if you're using Keynote, make sure you say present in window and then
oh,
share the window.
right.
That's clever. I should have done that a week ago. Thanks, Tom.
Where's that setting, Tom?
If you go into Keynote, it's under the present, I believe. Hold on. Let me fire mine up. I'm going to have to do this afternoon anyway. Under is it view?
I
I thought it was under play. Hold on, let me open up an actual presentation here.
I just wonder. Displaying.
It won't let me do it unless I have an actual presentation open, which is okay because I need to open one anyway.
Open display settings.
Oh, yeah, here we go. Under play, under the play menu, where it says play slideshow underneath, it says in full screen or in window. If you do it in window, then when you share screen, just share to the window where you can already fire it up, and that way it doesn't take over your screen.
Cool.
And that way you can flip through it, and all we'll see is the window. So, unless you share your desktop, but share the window.
Yeah. Well, I'll run it sort of in a sense full screen in that, not full screen, but I'll just fill.
From our perspective, it's full screen. From your perspective, you still have control over your screen.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We've got two Peters here today. One Rob, a Tom, a Froda, and a Mark, and a Dene, and a and my fruit bat.
And Fabian's theoretically here.
Oh, there's Fabian.
At least as a black box.
There is a holiday in Brussels today, so he has some parental duties. So he's apparently halfway here, on and off.
And we have two Marks. Not only do we have Mark Anderson, but we have Mark Bernstein. Mark, how are you? Hi.
Oh, great. So now I've got adult supervision. This will be fun. Mark may have some corrections.
That's what we always want, right? We want always to refine our work and our thinking. Good morning, everybody.
Dene, you're moderating, but when you've done your pre-introduction, can I do a 10-second introduction of Mark, please?
You're welcome to do that anytime.
Okay, I'll do it now then.
Do it now.
Obviously, everybody but maybe new Peter Dimitrios knows Mark. I just wanted to say I first met Mark when studying hypertext, or whatever we were studying, Mark. What we were studying? Web science, that was the official name. And he keeps telling me that spatial hypertext is just things in space, which is obviously clearly not all there is. So I just wanted to say it's been a long time, Mark. It's been at least 10 years that I've known you, and I'm very excited for today. And therefore, I will shush. So, Dene, over to you.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I am moderating today, and so it gives me great pleasure to see Mark Anderson and hear what he has to say today. He let me know that he's got a 30-minute presentation, roughly, and then he's got 2 planned breaks for questions, right? So, and he'll tell us when that happens. So we're not going to do a lot of interruptions while he's presenting. And at the end, we'll have the Q&A. So it's a little bit different than we've done in the past, but it will help with the flow and Mark's presentation. He's got a lot of images and things to show us at the end. So without further ado, Mark Anderson, my friend.
Okay, right. Let me share. I think this is it. Oh, everyone's kind of. Are you seeing a presentation?
Yes,
but you're sharing your whole desktop.
Yep, that's super. Anyway, that's fine. Well, I'll just check we're going backwards and forwards. Good. Okay. So, well, you know who I am now, so we can skip that. So this is going to be a drama in 3 parts, basically.
Mark,
yep.
Because of what Tom was saying about the whole desktop, you probably want to do a normal one because this is going to be recorded, often seen small, to get rid of all the other stuff. Do you want to just do normal play then?
It's
because we can see what you have in the on the
this
left there and all these.
Oh, okay. Well,
when you go under share, you should see one that's just the window.
Okay, sorry. Okay, right. Stand by. Sort of sharing.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Yeah. Right.
There we go.
Okay, right.
There we go.
As you can tell, I'm a regular at this sort of thing. Right. Okay. So I'm basically going to go through with a couple of short breaks. As I'm known to be wildly discursive. If the questions at the breaks are sort of short, close-ended ones, and we can take the wider things later on. But it's just a chance in case anyone's got a sort of burning question or looking at the audience, possibly a correction for me. We'll see how we go. So without further ado, I'll click on the right screen. Good. So if you work in hypertext, this is one of the things you often encounter. And I don't say this as a critique of people. I myself knew about hypertext through the web long before I basically came to formal study of it. But it is worth making the point that hypertext is not some weird form of the web. The web is a form of hypertext and postdates hypertext. And that's pertinent to our story here. So the picture on the left will probably be known to some here. That's one of Ted Nelson's sketches in which he's making his point about links and link material. And on the right is a demo, and sadly the Xanadu demo machine seems no longer available, but I did that for my talk at Hypertext 2017 to actually, that was using Xanadu to show transclusion, which I thought seemed suitably meta. But this is our start point. So at outset, hypertext very much was a matter of most often text, though the term hypertext is really taken to mean text and media with linkage. So we start back in the previous millennium, which for some of us is yesterday, and we're in PARC, Palo Alto in California at the PARC Xerox research labs, where one of the teams was working on hypertext systems, and these would have been at the time on high-end Unix workstations. So PCs of a sort, but not the sort any of us would have been able to afford to have at home. And the sort of systems they're working with were NoteCards and Randy Trigg's TextNet. And something else pertinent to the story here is that at the time, one of the things that very much was in the context of the work being done was that the things you were looking at tended to be logic structures, branching decision trees and the like. So this is where AI was, bearing in mind this is before the days of neural nets, but also there's work being done on things like business systems. So think of things like the sort of IBIS system, which Conklin was just beginning to do graphical form of with GIBIS and the like. And so one of the problems that was noticed when people were assessing the work on some of these systems was that the so-called tyranny of the link, implemented in the likes of NoteCards, was a set of argumentation link types that had come out of Randy Trigg's PhD, which in fact was first PhD in hypertext, which is a side point. And the expectation was that you would decide to link something, you would create a link, and then you would choose from this enormous laundry list of links, and thus everything would be beautifully captured. So nice engineering approach, no loose edges, everything's set in stone. And I found this warning in the thing that says choosing appropriate link types is important, as they will determine the ways you're able to extract information from your system. This is true, but not necessarily helpful for the user for reasons I'll explain in a moment. And if you're interested, although many of these old systems are lost to science, you can actually have a crack at NoteCards. There is an emulation online at interlisp.org. So if you're sufficiently interested or sufficiently bored, you can have a go at that. So what was being noticed with the work in NoteCards was that users really didn't want to sit around trying to decide what to link, what the link type should be. It was an answer they didn't have in their mind at that moment. And what was discovered is they were using a type of card in the system called a sketch card, where you could essentially make a diagram. And lo and behold, they were making ad hoc diagrams where they were using almost a spatial association of their content to indicate the linkage, thus circumventing the tyranny of the link. This observation fed into one of the team, Kathy Marshall, with colleagues, coming up with a system called Aquanet. The strapline was Aquanet holds your information in place. And the idea was this was going to be a graphical form of hypertext where the users will be allowed to define the objects that they wanted to use to illustrate the system. And then they would have a freeform a graphical map, a plane on which they could lay down their argumentation. And that's a screen grab from, well, sorry, a low quality print of a screen grab of Aquanet at the time. What was interesting about Aquanet is after its debut at Hypertext 91, there was a follow-up paper 2 years before the Mist, which again Kathy Marshall and colleagues reflected on what they'd learned from Aquanet. And what was interesting is it was success, but not in the way they predicted, because actually, much as people didn't like trying to work out which link type to use, they didn't actually much like having to predefine all the objects with which to make their graphical layout, because really what they want to do is just get on with the job in hand. So again, you see that you see this emergent strand of behavior. People just want to use an ad hoc placement. They know what they're doing, but they just don't know what the structure is yet. And these are further of the limited number of screen grabs of work going on in Aquanet. The one on the left, you're sort of basically seeing units of argumentation. On the right is a much larger illustration of basically somebody trying to work through the one bit you can see with links. So top left of the screen is I think it was a screen grab taken from Conklin's GIBIS system, and they were trying to recreate the argumentation that was in there. So drawing on Aquanet, Marshall and Shipman then wrote a paper in 93 called Searching for the Missing Link, discovering implicit structure in spatial hypertext, which is where the term essentially enters the dialogue here. But interestingly, in the paper, they don't actually anywhere make a formal definition of what spatial hypertext is. But in their description of what has gone before, what comes out quite clearly is that it's not about whether you're having explicit visible links or not, but more strongly, it's about incremental formalization, the ability to build the structure as you go. Spatial parsing is involved. There is a parser, but what it's not doing, is some might assume, is it's not drawing the picture for you. It's basically helping by spotting patterns that you've laid down. So if you put things in a certain orientation, you might be implying that you're making up a list, or you're making a grouping here as a separate grouping to a grouping there. And essentially, so where you are on the map is what you are. And as your structure goes ahead, what you are when placing new things is probably where you'll go. So very, very loose, but supporting incremental formalization. And this can seem quite odd, because certainly this isn't the way you go about building designing a building or a bridge, because normally you sort everything out before you break ground. There is no uncertainty as to what size rebar you're going to use on this strut or something. But where spatial hypertext found itself being used was in information triage, which normally means you're at a point where you don't know what the structure of your problem domain is. You have a sense of an endpoint you want to get to, but you don't know quite what it looks like yet. So that paper led to a new system by Shipman and Marshall, which was shown at the European Conference on Hypertext 1994, called VIKI, and it basically took the bit. You might say they took the bit that worked in Aquanet. So they stepped away from this thing about building sort of argumentation objects, and they just said, okay, what we'll do is we'll let people think onto an open plane. And so there are a couple of screen grabs here. VIKI again sadly lost to science, but you can see it. We were beginning to see use of color screens early on, and the same structures are going on, the same ideas are going on here. And the thing I sort of take from reading this is that it's one of the things you get with a tool like this. It's avoiding premature formalization, which is something we're all used to. You dig into a subject, you head off with best intent in our direction, and duly find you're in a dead end. So you've got to tie off, turn around, go back, and take another direction. And in highly structured systems, this is problematic, because by that stage, you basically laid a lot of track to get to where you are. And you've either got to tear that all up or abandon it. And even if you're just abandoning it, you put a lot of effort into it. With a very open-ended system like this that allows for emergent structure, you don't have to worry about that. You just put in the structure that you see as it arises, and you can adjust as you go. Following on from VIKI, around the turn of the century, Frank Shipman had moved to Texas A&M by this stage, and he and his group worked on Visual Knowledge Builder. It was first shown at a conference in 2001, but seems to have started work about 1999. It was built in early Java. Sadly, most of the installers were lost. The only one we have is, in fact, for one of the very early versions, which is what's actually shown in this screen grab. One of the interesting things is that at this point, this is now running on a normal PC. So this, at the time, would have been running on Windows 95 or Windows NT. In my version here, it's actually running under Windows 98, virtualized in VirtualBox on this Intel Mac behind me. One of the interesting things in it, which was new in VKB, is you may notice in the screen grab, there's a sort of scrubber bar at the bottom of the gray area. And what that allowed you to do was to actually scrub the temporal axis of the creation of your spatial hypertext. So by moving it, you could actually see objects appear or alter. It wasn't necessarily known what this would yield, but it was thought to be an interesting way at looking at the emergence of structure. Bearing in mind that something I hadn't mentioned before is, like VIKI and Aquanet, these were quasi-multi-user applications. So this isn't something like Google Docs where everyone's just typing willy-nilly wherever they want. But essentially, there was a degree of record locking that meant a number of people could work on the same file and contribute to essentially creating a common picture in a single file from multiple sources. We're also seeing further growth in the way that content is nested. So you could add content, but you could collapse various containers. So you didn't have to have everything open all the time. And one way this is sort of useful is that you normally have limited space. Screens were even smaller back then than they are now. And also the structure nods towards the fact that you might want to actually do something with what you've created here outside that application. So hitherto, hypertext systems were broadly a standalone system in which you created a hypertext. In those days, often quite small. It was probably maybe a couple of hundred nodes rather than thousands of nodes as we might see in the sort of web age. And so you would use the application essentially both to read and write. But there seems, the sense was coming that we probably need to actually think more widely than that. And then the trail sort of goes cold. So there were a number of experiments done with VKB and extensions to it, but really by the late 2000s, this particular strand of research appeared to sort of be running out of steam. And so you might say, okay, was this a wonderful idea that we just didn't manage to find its place? But I think the reality is more prosaic. Those who certainly worked in funded academic research will realize it's really difficult to keep going when folk keep taking your money. And it's natural. Attention goes all ways. So today, the AI, we're burning all our family silver to get on the AI train. Who knows if it will pay off? But it's just, it's damping down all sorts of other things. So don't read too much at this point into the fact that the sort of that succession of Aquanet and VIKI and VKB didn't necessarily appear to lead anywhere. So I'll do a quick summary at this point. So just to pick up the points. So the sort of a lightweight description of what's happening is where you are is what you are when you're doing a spatial hypertext. A key thing was avoiding premature formalization. This was achieved by having good support for incremental formalization, allowing the structure to come out of what you were doing. And unsurprisingly, an area where this is good is information triage, where you don't quite know the endpoint. You want to get to the end, but you don't necessarily know what the end looks like, or not yet. And it may seem that this appears to subvert the primacy of links, but I will address that point further on in the talk. And we get to our first intermission. So are there any questions, Dene?
Yes, there's quite a few comments in the chat. So I'm just looking at them right now. So Fabienne's been talking about way to integrate this into our project and thinking about this in terms of visualization. Tom has his hand up. He mentioned I created spatial hypertext in Miro, which we talked about previously. Tom, do you want to take over and say something about that?
Well, I just had a question. Some of this history I don't know very well. Do you have a recommended source, especially for the PARC stuff and the later stuff? Is this written down anywhere?
There are some at the end of this, and in fact, what I'll do is when we get to the end, I'll make sure they show in the video. So there are sources for some of the papers. There's someone present. One of the black boxes on the screen at the moment contains someone who knows rather a lot about that because he's been at Hypertext since 97 onwards, 87 onwards. If my paper for the Hypertext this year gets in, there will be an awful lot about spatial hypertext in terms of references. If you're looking for past things. The funny thing was, in fact, I realized in writing the paper this year that because I've used this sort of spatial hypertext tools for so long, it hadn't really occurred to me that it was quite so unknown in general. And I'll also touch on something that's probably raised by your point about Miro and things in terms of what is and isn't a spatial hypertext. Personally, I don't like to be too prescriptive about it because I just don't think it's useful. I think it's useful to know, in a sense, what the more core of spatial type hypertext is, and then but there are lots of interesting edges around it, and plus the world changes as was for me.
And that's what's fascinating to me about the story in a way, because I bounced around the edges of spatial hypertext, but some of the stuff you have is stuff I'd actually never heard of before. So I'm really curious. You piqued my curiosity.
It's interesting. Actually, Mark Benson was who made a comment to me because I just asked about something, saying, I was asking about the origin of the term, and we were talking about some of these early systems, and the comment was, well, it would have been obvious to everyone in the room. And I think what telling this reminds us is that actually it was a very small room with not many people in it. So whilst it would have been evident to them who would have seen this body of work going on over some years.
Mark, may I mention something?
Yeah.
So Klaus Sazenbeck is doing quite a bit of work with spatial hypertext right now with his projects.
Yep.
So there's a big interest in it, coming out of his lab and his folks right now. It has been for the past 5 years he's been working on this. Yeah.
See, we need spatial hypertext to fully comprehend spatial hypertext.
We'll touch on that in a moment. So I'm going to crack on before. So if there appeared to be one dead end, other things were happening, and lo and behold, we're back in the 1980s again, because back in the mid 80s, circa 1984, Bolter, Joyce, and Smith started work on a system that emerged the world of Storyspace, which first shown in 1987. So contemporaneous with the work that was going on at PARC, but I don't believe there was any sort of crosstalk between them. Mark may have a comment on that, but I haven't seen any sign that there was particularly interplay between the two. Part of what was being done is the bit for which Storyspace is perhaps best known, which was looking outside the linear narrative and how you could write in a hypertextual manner. But it's worth saying that the people who made this didn't see it primarily. This wasn't, as it were, a literary tool alone. And in fact, at the time, there wasn't anything like it. So lots of people were just using it because it was good and they could get other work done. Though it is most remembered now for its support of a lot of early hypertext literature. So it had this notion of writing spaces, which are sort of hypertext nodes. And one of its views, the map, allowed you to put those writing spaces where you wanted, because that might help you to understand the interrelation between them. And I found two screenshots here, one basically with no links in, to make the point that you could use these maps without links. You didn't have to, but in reality, certainly if you were doing something like a literary piece, it would look more like the one at the bottom. But I think again, it helps show the point that it's not necessary to have the links to have meaning. You can have a map that has a great amount of meaning without having to have explicit links within it. So Storyspace had three different views. It had a map view, which is what's shown here, an outline, which looks like an outline, and a chart, which looks like a all chart type layout. The key thing that's often missed is it's the same source data, just in different views. So for those of you who know about Engelbart's view specs, this is in a way a form of view spec. And it's not intentional. They weren't, I don't think it was their intent to take that idea. But there is this really interesting notion of you have your writing spaces, your hypertext nodes, and you can look at them in a number of different ways, in a way that is pertinent to the task you're doing or the thing you're trying to understand. In 1990, Eastgate App, Mark, who's here now, took over development of Storyspace. Still around today, you can use it. It's been recoded twice, I think, at least twice, and it's still around about. Then, during the 2000s, after experience with other tools, I'm anxious. Stop talking about the man who wrote this. Anyway, so Eastgate Systems produced Tinderbox, which is interesting. You can see in it many things that draw from some of the ideas in Storyspace, but it was moving things a bit further forward. Not least of which the fact that by the time this was being written at the turn of the century, the web was very much something here to stay. It was no longer as a rarity. What's very interesting and comes through really strongly in use of Tinderbox is the use of prototyping and inheritance, which makes it very easy to basically make a note that stands proxy for a type of note, and simply by telling another note that you use that prototype, a whole lot of essentially pre-configuration can happen. Now, most often you'll see it talked about using visual motifs because it's easier to show, but that's only the part of it. All sorts of stuff can be inherited by a note using a prototype. And the prototype and the inheritance that flows from it makes incremental formalization remarkably easy. In fact, you get so used to it, you only miss it when you try and use another tool that doesn't have that kind of thing. There's also strong export. There's an understanding that information probably needs to go somewhere else aside from the app it's being built in. That was less obvious sort of 10 years previously. It's certainly the case these days. You may well be writing in one app, you may be creating your hypertext in one thing, but it's going to go somewhere else. And also, there's no one right way to look at it. So as I speak now, Tinderbox actually has 10 different views that you can use. You don't have to use them all. There isn't, FOMO is not a necessity. You can write only ever in the map, or you can write only ever in some other view. It doesn't matter. What's very interesting is, as with Storyspace, it's the same information presented in a different manner, and you choose that different view because it's pertinent to the task you're doing at the time. Indeed, you may be chopping and changing between the same information in different views. That is all possible. And then it's been alluded to. There's a conversation I had with Mark back at the beginning of the year about, are there other spatial hypertext tools? Well, in a way, actually, not many. Dene's alluded to Klaus Atzenbeck and the team at Herford University in Germany, who are doing extremely interesting things with a much larger, more complicated hypertext system. So they have basically they have essentially a complete open hypertext system, and they've been working primarily with graph databases in Neo4j. But what that's done to allow is doing things like working with recommended systems. So you might be looking at, say, the documentation of an organization, and the system can be indicating things that might be pertinent to you, that it's found, that it's been able to find, and where you may want to make the relationship more concrete. So it's another interesting take on this notion of emergent structure. And then Twine is interesting. I mean, Twine is basically a tool or a notion for writing interactive hypertext fiction. That's where it started, and it has a sort of app version. And you could say, because it has one part of it is its sort of map view. And whilst it doesn't have lots of views, it does have this notion that the layout is pertinent to your understanding of the structure you're creating. There are some interesting edge cases at the moment. I'm very taken by. I haven't dug in deeply into tapestries yet, because it was demonstrated here by Bob Stein. It's really interesting. It was funded, I think, by the Internet Archive. And it's an interesting form of storytelling, but it uses essentially an open map with no formal structure. The structure of the experience you have comes from the human who creates it. I have seen people trying to use AI for this, but in all sorts of, normally in the area of sort of note-taking tools for thought, but the outcome is not generally impressive. Because unsurprisingly, all an AI has to work with is the information it has. So it's harder for it to make the associative jumps that the human makes, because often when we're doing this emergent structure, we're putting in what isn't there. Finding things you already know and representing them is absolutely in AI's wheelhouse, and it does it very well in a whole host of areas. Something else that's a bit tangential, but if you haven't come across it, Richard Brass, visualizing with text. It's very interesting. Basically, this is his PhD written up, but it helps make the point that it's this interaction between the visualization and what you take from it. So the structure, the way you present it, is giving you additional information other than, say, just the textual labels. He's working very closely with the idea of text always being present, and that's why it's quite interesting. And I've noted at the bottom, because we were asking about, well, what is and what isn't. I think there are lots of things that, because they look a bit like a map in the tools we've just been discussing, there is a simplistic assumption that they are de facto spatial hypertext. In most cases, they probably aren't. It doesn't mean that they are less for that. But not everything needs to be a spatial hypertext, is perhaps another way of looking at it. But there does tend to be a sense. So a good example was when Obsidian burst onto the scene, and it had its chart view, which effectively is a force-directed graph of the links in your notes. But it doesn't really tell you anything that you didn't know already. It just tells you all the links that you arguably knew were in there in the first place. And it's controlled, it's laid out by a force-directed graph. So does it really tell you very much? I would say not. Others might say so. But the point here is that surprisingly there actually aren't that many tools. At that point, I'll take before circling back into spatial hypertext, I'll take any other short questions if there are, or crack on.
Folks, questions for Mark? There's been a lot of comments and a lot of things posted.
Well, it's fine. I mean, I can crack on this. If there are no pressing questions, I'll just crack on to the end and we can take it on.
That's something I think we should bring up. In this context, what do you mean by concept map, Mark?
Concept maps, well, that's a type of, it's a specific type of graph where you basically have a controlled vocabulary. So it's, I guess you could say it's a graph with a controlled vocabulary. So the only things that you get in the graph are things that are the concept. So you're mapping concept A to concept B. Fred, yes.
Thank you. That's very clear, and I agree. Related to that, one thing I should have asked you years ago is, for spatial hypertext, is the expectation that the thing that you see is what you get, as in you write a word or a sentence or whatever, or is there an expectation that you interact with it and there's more to be revealed, or is that irrelevant?
I would say the latter. And in fact, probably my next couple of slides will probably get to this. So I think if I may, because you can always ask me again if I don't cover this. So so what is a spatial hypertext? Well, here we go. Is this a spatial hypertext?
Yes.
Is this a spatial hypertext?
Yes. I'll show.
I'm not sure that those small examples really help. So what I think an easier way to do this is to take something and reveal the spatial hypertext within it. So don't try and understand the picture. I know it looks like a sort of a whole mess. Don't try and understand the picture. What it happens to be is, about a couple of hours work one afternoon, my thesis advisor had asked me to explain a subject area in my work, and I just was trying to get a handle on some of the parts of it. So I sat down in Tinderbox a couple of hours, and this map was never the only purpose of this map was really to do this. It wasn't to make a nice diagram at the end. It was to help me to understand, to make the brief that I then made to my thesis advisor on the nature of things. But if we strip out some of the noise, so let's take out the links. The links are still there in this document, I might add. I've just turned them off. Literally, they're just not displayed. And we turn off the text because we can't read the text anyway. So what's the point? I know what I put in there. Bearing in mind, this is a single person tool. So I'm not having to worry about whether somebody else knows what the thing in the top left-hand corner is. But what you can immediately now see is you can begin to see some groupings. You can see that something's going on here. We've got a group of things in the top right-hand corner. All the dark red ones, there's a grouping sort of down towards the left. And there's some other smatterings. Now, how that coloring is done, going back to the point I made earlier, I'm using something with color in it just because it helps to see the point. The different colors are just caused by me using prototypes in Tinderbox. If I took the prototype for all the yellow notes and made it orange, all the yellow notes would become orange. Or if I made them circles rather than boxes. But this is I think also gets to the point that maybe Fred was asking, that I would contend that with spatial hypertext that less is more. Once you turn off all the noise, you begin to start to see something, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to find structure. So you don't need let's put it this, not everyone needs it. I think that over 20 years of sort of helping as a tester of Tinderbox and using it, consulting with it, and in a sense teaching it to others, it's clear that some people struggle with this because, in the way that we're all on a axis of ability and understanding of things, the more literal you are in your understanding, probably the harder this gets. Because if the text isn't there, does the text still exist? well, it does. But if in the way that your mind thinks of it, that abstraction removes it, that can be difficult. But I don't think everyone needs to be using spatial hypertext all the time. Its strongest value, I think, is when you're doing information triage. I shall let Mark Bensing correct me on this. Oh no, that's Fabian's thumbs up. I thought I'd almost got a thumbs up there. But anyway, but just to go back, so this is exactly the same document. Nothing's been lost, and I could show this. I don't have it set up here, but I could show this same information to you in a number of other ways, which I might do for myself if I thought it was pertinent. The main thing is that the text, the labeling, is not getting in the way of the understanding of the structure. There hasn't been an awful lot of writing about spatial hypertext either, and a paper I would strongly commend to you is Mark Bensing's paper from 2011 called "Can We Talk About Spatial Hypertext?" The link at the top is to his website. So if you don't have access to the ACM library, where the formal paper is, you can get that there. And the pictures are there, from out of this paper. And you can see that there is some discussion here about thinking about the, in a sense, the rhetoric, the layout, the argumentation that is going on. Links are not in massive evidence, although there is nothing to stop you using links. And you're also seeing a variety of sort of visual stylings being used. And someone asked about XR. When I was for Greg, slightly kicking and screaming into into XR things, my first thought was it's a holodeck, and the second was spatial hypertext. Well, not that term, but this sort of working. And this underpins why I sort of keep saying, well, look, can't we just put the things in there? It doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't matter where they go, because we're going to do something with them. Worrying too much too early about structure is invariably, I've found, an impediment to actually getting work done when you're trying to understand the shape of things. So the story's unwritten. What the extra dimension does, I don't know. But as we've discussed, doing stuff in XR is not necessarily about it being 3D. It's more about being able to view it possibly from another angle, of having other forms of salience that we don't have on a flat 2D screen. I suspect is stronger than, whether we're making full use of a sort of Z-axis. Because one of the problems is that if we want to do it with textual labels, we hit an immediate problem, because you either got to make the labels very big when they're far away, or you're not going to be able to read them. So that's a problem to deal with, which is another reason why judicious abstraction, when you're actually doing the more interrogative phase of things, is really useful. You can always turn the labels back on. You know what they're there. It's there in the data. That it's just data. It's in the file or the document, or what we call in the volume. You don't have to worry about it as long as it's there. You pull it forward as you want. You visualize things as you want. The environment serves you, not the other way around. And I think, yep, I think that's I probably cantered through it at a pace, but that's more time. I'm just I'll put up so that it's there and in the video. Those are papers that are either referred to in the talk, or sort of first or second hand. And just because for good measure, not because I think people are worried about it, but yes, there is a source for the images. They're by and large from papers. Otherwise, they're things that I've actually sort of created myself. Right, I'll leave this up for now in case there are any questions and people want me to show slides again, or do you want me to stop sharing? I don't mind.
Let's stop sharing for now, and
okay, cool. Yep.
Read everybody's faces, and then Frodo's got his hand up first. So Frodo, take it away.
Mark, thank you. I owe you a lot more than a coffee, and thank you again. And one of the things you talked about at the end there I'm particularly grateful that Peter's here today because I'm not sure I fully agree with you in all cases, not that you made it for all cases, that text has to be large in XR if it's far away from you, because you can always either walk towards it or use a gesture in some systems to bring it towards you, which is why I think it's a really, really exciting opportunity now for the notion of memory palaces and spatial hypertext to become good friends and figure out what can happen.
No, indeed. The point I was driving at really is if you want, if the text, for the text to be usable at the time you're looking at it, it's either going to be big enough to read, or you've got to be close enough to it. You're absolutely right. One of the joys of something in XR is actually, yeah, you can just walk over it to it, or pull it towards yourself. That is absolutely the case. But the reason I sort of talk about visual noise is something I really have learned from having had 2 decades of just using these type of tools a lot, and found, against my expectation, I might add, that less is more. And my observation from sort of teaching people or helping people through that is that there is this sort of moment of epiphany where people are massively resistant. Especially, say, if you're someone who's working in humanities, we spend a lot of time working very, very close to text. And it just seems so counterintuitive that basically the first thing you should do is saw off the branch you're sitting on that gives you any sense of context. But once you realize that you sort of know what it is, if you made this thing, one shape and that another color or something, you did that, you know that, and 99% of people can just track that for the amount of time they need it. Bearing in mind that you haven't lost anything, the text didn't go anywhere. The fact that you're not looking at it on the screen in front of you, or part of the screen in front of you, is the thing to hold on to. It hasn't got. Once you are comfortable that the fact that you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, then I think that's the releasing part of it.
Tom has his hand up. Tom?
Yeah, I kind of want to tease out what you see is the difference between concept mapping and spatial hypertext. I mean, everything you've described in spatial hypertext, I also do in concept maps. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting with some concept map tools like Miro is the ability to insert links. And as I discussed in the thing I wrote a couple of years ago, to insert links to other concept maps, for instance, so you can get this sort of 3D chessboard effect where you're connecting up concepts with concepts of concepts. And of course, the other thing I've kind of suggested for this group at various times is, I want my box of whatever ultimately we end up formatting that, or you end up formatting that, of ideas and information. But I also want to be able to connect over to Dene's box or Froda's box and see what they're doing, and also have systems that allow me to tease out connections and links and doorways between my spatial map, whatever you want to call, and theirs. And the ultimate of Vannevar Bush's breadcrumbs, right? That's what we're all kind of trying to get back to. So,
yeah, I think it. Well, what you're saying just reinforces the thing that if you don't rush to ram things into fixed boxes with too much gusto, turns out all these things join up at the edge. So it's something of a fool's errand to say, is this more than that? Because they blur.
Right.
And you may start in something that might think of itself as a concept map, which at its most rigorous might mean that, you can't even put something into it unless it's sort of defined in all sorts of ways, upside down, up, down and sideways, as being a concept. But if you have something that's a bit more permissive, you just put something in because you added something, and then you're shading towards the sort of things I'm used to doing in Tinderbox map. One thing I should have mentioned, because it was wasn't really the core of this, but it is brought up by what you said about linking to other boxes. Tinderbox, as Storyspace did from its inception, you are able to nest objects. So when you look at a map, what you are actually the document, the information is actually stored as an outline. So under the hood, if you take a Tinderbox document, open it up, what you'll see is an XML document. So the canonical structure even if you just have one flat map and nothing else, is an outline. You're just looking at the root of the outline. But you can nest things if you need to. One of the sort of one of the formalisms that comes along is people find that you might explore to start with in a very flat structure, but you know you're going to write something. So you start to think about where the pieces go and things, this is chapter 1, right? Well, we'll put the chapter 1 things in a chapter 1 box. So you can do that. What it's hard to do is to look at all the levels of the map all the time, which people always say, well, how's it so hard? Well, it turns out, for instance, if you want two things to be in the same XY location, it makes the presentation a bit difficult. And in our mind's eye, we also, well, can't the machine sort that out? Well, no, the machine's still got to have a rubric for sorting it out. And it turns out that probably whatever suggestion we had is not so great. So that movement between an entirely flat structure, where often you're looking at its association, its relative position to something, and there's still scope to use explicit links of varying kinds, if that helps you, and to mix and match. Not everything has to be an explicit link, for instance. Other cool things you can do with once you've got once you have links is in Tinderbox, which I know well, and there will be other tools that can do this, you basically can look at the maps of the links alone. So all you're going to see then is, and in Tinderbox is done on a hyperbolic plane. So you can just look at, well, what is the link structure? How far away? You might want to say, how far am I away from that thing? And I deliberately use that term because the whole thing is, what one person is doing with that question might be a completely different subject matter to somebody else. But the affordance of being able to do this, how close am I? But you could also, in a flat map, you might just look at a number of objects that have no visual linkage at all, and still ask, well, how close am I? I guess back to that very simple sort of example I put in there deliberately with just a couple of boxes in space. So we got two things the same shape but a different color that are closer together from something else. But that very simplistic sort of classification is something that I've observed people take to very readily, because there's quite a low cognitive load to doing that, because you're not worried about, oh dear, did the title wrap, or did it, that doesn't matter. You want to know, is this thing more like that thing? That's really what you're normally trying to do at that stage. Does that help?
Yeah, so Mark, just to take this on a little
Absolutely.
bit further, remember we talked about knowledge cubes some months ago. And I got very excited about the idea of spatial hypertext in conjunction with knowledge cubes, because a cube then, denotes a space that's got some sort of shape with sides to it, right? And so I began mapping out with Andrew a way to go from one side of the cube to the other, thinking about spatiality in an object itself. So not just the boxes among boxes, but the box itself. And if we're putting information or data on the various sides of a box, and we want to hyperlink to that data, then we're going through the box to get to that data. So now we're intersecting the space within the box inside that cube. And I think that offers a lot of really interesting possibilities of what to do in a VR XR environment, right?
Yeah, I think the unanswered question in that is simply to know what the cube represents in context. So it's probably encapsulating something. So what is it encapsulating in relation to the subject around it? Is it essentially like, is it just a form of containment, as in the sort of 2D method of basically putting one thing inside another? Is it something richer? Is it different? And as we've talked about, well, it might be a cube, but it could be, it could be a sort of hyperbolic space inside. All sorts of weird and funky, wonderful things possible. And it's a new medium, and the answer is we probably don't know yet.
Well, what's really cool is to think about them as these empty spaces that you're allowed to go from surface to surface around that space, but then you're clustering them inside, just like a story space node, right? So you can put a cube inside of a cube, then you're hyperlinking within those cubes. So moving story space is what I'm imagining into, Mark's here, so this is great for, I'm glad to say this, but moving story space into a three-dimensional environment where you're hyperlinking through the boxes themselves into other boxes themselves, and imagining the kind of rich complexity you can build out of that. And I'll turn my comment over to Fabienne.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. I think first we need this from time to time to basically step back and think and ponder, and also the historical aspect, because it's lovely to reinvent the wheel, but yeah, it's also interesting to see how many wheels have been built before and how and why. So yeah, thank you for all this. I think the tension is kind of similar indeed in XOR, and it's kind of the few comments already done before that I think what the spatial and hypertext, the kind of conflict is spatial for most people at least is quite natural. Like you go to a blackboard, a whiteboard, or like have a bunch of post-it on a poster. I think for most people, moving post-it or drawing again in space on a blackboard, it's a bit how you organize information. So it is so cheap and yet powerful, and indeed finding structure and organizing, hence the post-it, like how something so cheap can be like have post-its everywhere, like because you can move them around, you just don't write. So it is spatial, but it's spatial in again the very straightforward way that everybody is used to, and then you mix that with hypertext, which is so powerful because you can have links, and then suddenly you have kind of like warping tunnels that you can go through. And I brought this. I don't think I shared it actually before. It's called Visualizing Math with 3D Printing. And I have a couple of those actually 3D printed. Then you use the light to see the projection or curved space. So this one is a bit trickier to show. But then you can hold the thing. I think it's magical, really. But I think it's the same kind of tension in XR and in 2D, that something spatial is, again, we move in space. We can't help ourselves. Since we were born, we move in space. So we move knowledge objects or post-its or whatever in space. Hard to not do that, really. And then suddenly hypertext, or here like hyperbolic space or non-Euclidean spaces, links that teleport us. And I think that's kind of the continuous tension. And I think it's the same in XR. Namely, we have object we move so naturally, and suddenly we have like magical powers. I don't have a better word for it. I don't have a term, but like suddenly you can dive into by a link. You're in another space. You open up. So it's kind of, I think that to me, at least, that's the tension there, that you have something so straightforward and direct, and something that is mind-blowing at the same time. So yeah, I don't have any suggestion. I think it's interesting. I think that's the kind of tension we have to explore in 2D and in XR. And yes, I don't really have suggestion beside trying it. And I think a bunch of comments also about the user-generated, or at least user-supported content, because we have to figure it out. Because maybe also we need the mathematical concept behind it. How does those work? Like seeing in a hyperbolic space or landscape, if you don't really understand it, is not as natural as walking in it. So yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a long vented, but yeah, I think that's the interesting tension to me.
Frode?
Oh, several things. And again, Mark, thank you. This is quite lovely. So first of all, I'd just like to pay respect to Bill Atkinson, whom we lost not many days ago, who was, of course, a giant in this field, partly because he didn't overthink it. He did his own thing, which fits in some ways to what we're talking about and not to others. And Dene and I talked earlier today about how great it would be to maybe later on have a research project around how can you put intelligence in these things, like programming, scripting, HyperCard to some extent, and make it spatial. So yeah, it's a very sad week for that reason. Also, when you expand media, it's good to go in different directions. So my darling wife gave me a wood turning Christmas gift. So I made this yesterday. It's a wooden pencil, or rather a pen. And there's a slight, I decided to go for a very simple design, but there is actually slight indentation here for my fingers. And it was a really interesting experience. And I know Fabian will agree because he's very much the let's go make it and learn. Just to learn to make your own pen was absolutely mind-blowing. So coming back to what we're talking about here, Mark, just wrote a note that link connection, proximity, and binding, as Windsurf has introduced to me, at least the concept, saved layouts and auto layouts in addition to manual thought and back. There's so many exciting things that can happen. And as usual, Mark, you made me think about what I do in Author. Oh my God, I must rename things because Mark said some clever things. And here's the fun thing, and I think this mirrors a little bit what you said, Fabian, that having a rich space where you just put stuff in and of itself is useful. You know, the little concept map in Author is not a concept map because you could put links and all kinds of stuff in there. So I'm very, very grateful for the context you've given us today, Mark. And I wonder, in addition to the either full spatiality or pseudo spatiality, what dreams might you have, Mark, for going in a either pure or expanded spatial hypertext future?
Oh, well, I'm not really. I mean, I think what I'm finding interesting at the moment is just trying to think about what the possibility of XR offers that's usefully new in terms of certainly information triage, which is in a sense the heart. I think is the heart of where the notion of spatial hypertext probably has its greatest worth, because it was interesting. There was mention of automatic layouts, and I don't wish to. I probably do come across a bit of this. I'm not against automation. All sorts of things are wonderful. I rely on them sort of daily. But one of the things I'm constantly reminded of is, you know, that, I mean, in a sense that it's the old thing about, you know, never send a human to do a computer's task. Well, the same is sort of true. And it's funny, one area where we still haven't produced something that does what we do is sort of in this area of associative emergent structure, mainly because we're using information that is not on the playing table and isn't necessarily even sort of hidden. You know, it's not. In other words, it's information that isn't even really there. I don't. Nor do I see that as some sort of a tension or a conflict. It's just an interesting observation. And who knows? In 10 years, in many more years, we may have solved that. I just don't know. But I think. If I have one for sort of spatial hypertext or this sort of thing is I would like to see more people use it. It's not something everybody needs. It's not something that you need to write your laundry list. You can, if you so choose, because, you know, it's what you have to hand, you like it. But there are lots of things that you don't necessarily need it for. But where it's, I think for anyone who's working with information, especially at the early stage, and who doesn't want to over formalize. One of the things I found shocking when I came back to study in 2013 was just how dogmatic everything was. You know, everything started by saying, well, in our village, wear our hats this way, and, you know, if you don't want to play like that, there's the exit. I'm thinking, but having always worked in a sort of very interdisciplinary way, I never got that, because all I've been told is what doesn't work. Much more interested in what does work. You know, what works, what joins across the piece. And so that's why I think that this very loose system and its implicit requirement for incremental formalization is such a sort of hidden gem. I did see Peter had asked a question about, sorry, two comments. I'll just quickly pick one. Peter had asked about composites, which I know are something that are implemented in Tinderbox. The idea of a composite is essentially you create a number of nodes, call them what you will, that you have pre-associated in some way, possibly with a sort of, and it's used in a map, so they have a sort of layout and the size. This, if I recall, Mark may correct me, this was something that I think it was there I think this first cropped up in the 1993 Spatial Hypertext paper, if not before. I mean, you could look at Aquanet and say, well, that's exactly what they were planning to do, because you would say, right, for this bit of logic I wish to do, it's going to have 4 parts and they're going to sit together in this way. The interesting thing is, that's great if you know you need a widget that shape. But I guess it's a bit like ordinary Lego and Lego that comes in a kit. I always like the ordinary Lego because you can build anything with it. But if you've got the kit, you can only build things the kit can make, which is a lot, but not necessary as open-ended. Yes, well, and not open as open-ended. So I guess that's that. The observation, and Mark can certainly correct me here, is I haven't seen in my sort of, in my community sort of forum have Tinderbox. I don't see a lot of use being made of composites. Now, whether that's because the people who use composites just don't turn up and talk about it, or whether it's indicative, my sense is that it gets back to premature formalization again. And I suspect that the people who get good at using the tool just don't need the composites. I think they could use them. I believe Mark uses them for instance, note taking. So you might get a composite. Well, I'll have a composite set up because I can drop this in, and I know there are 4 or 5 things that I would like to put in sort of separate notes that are going to be true of any talk. So that's a really good case where you could say in advance, yeah, I'm going to want one of those. But probably in the rush, you just write the notes anyway.
Mark,
so it's not a good bad conversation. Yeah.
We get some more questions because we get time for all the great things people want to ask you. Frode and then Fabienne.
By the way.
I have a sales pitch to all of you. Join us Monday week as well. Because, of course, as I think all of you know, at least you should know, we're going to be doing our halfway demo. And it's really, really interesting. Dene brought up some amazing things that's still buzzing in my head. One of them is, sorry, Dene, for quoting you so loudly, but I've thought very much about XR and text as being thinking and communicating. She brought up the notion of not just creating, but something that makes you be or feel creative. So there is some kind of unleashing potential here. So I think a lot of what you're talking about, Mark, will be extremely interesting in XR, because the demos that I've done to people so far, there's so many cool things, but the basic act of, without any error, any stress, any wrong, move this here, it's amazing, right? There's no iPad, small thing, there's no mouse, you move that there. And it speaks so highly to spatial hypertext. The fact that we only have text now, we can add other things, fine. But I think if you guys can join us with a headset next week or whenever, links and everything will be on the webpage. Literally will help us understand, because like Mark said, it may be helpful to go spatial. It may not be the key thing. We just don't know yet. But now we have the way to try it. And just a tiny little thing to you, Fabienne, about the Lego kits. Lego is sold in boxes that can't be reclosed. I think that's really, really clever, because they also agree in principle that you shouldn't just do what's on the cover. So I think that's kind of neat. Thank you.
So just to respond to Frode, I'm calling it the midway because halfway sounds like half-assed. So the midway. So just to rephrase. And then secondly, I want to mention that when we're talking about the creativity part, it's the non-Euclidean, the non-structural. So not seeing a monitor in front of you in VR space. I mean, why do that? Why repeat what we can do in real time, in real space, in physical space? So just getting us out of the normal, everyday experience. Fabienne.
So to jump back a this on the why do this, I think a lot of time, or at least in my personal experience, the excuse for this, for why doing it, which I disagree with, but it tends to be communication. Namely, if we do, I will not swear there on the recording, but if we blow the brain out of people, they might actually not understand. So there is usually the kind of, like we start Euclidean and then we grow out of it to become non-Euclidean is kind of the excuse. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but at least historically in my work, that's what happened. But I think indeed at some point you need, if it does piss me off, to be honest, when I see a lot of VR experiences that are a repetition of like literally going outside. Just go outside. Just do the thing. It is, or like virtual Lego. If the virtual Lego don't fly in the air and you, sorry, don't want to go there, but it does annoy me. More formally, actually. So Mark, when I hear the presentation, I'm a little bit obsessed with XR because I think, despite all the flaws, this is where the change of agency can be the biggest. I think it's nuts that somehow we have a couple of hundreds of euros headset. It fits in the backpack. It's so light, and then it's not a whiteboard you have. It's whatever you want it to be. It's huge. We're not there yet, so it's still a path toward this. But I think in terms of agency, this is where I see the most potential. So the question is basically, in terms of incremental formalization, how can one visualize this? Is it like a frame that is half transparent, or the dotted lines that the more you use them, the thicker they become, or the more closer they are together? I'm wondering also, how to do this in XR, in 2D also. Maybe how can we eventually see the formalization? Like, how does it strengthen? And it reminded me also in terms of biology, the concept of stigmergy, where you see ants, they build a path and then they release pheromones, and you don't see that path, but chemically it is there and it grows stronger and stronger. If this somehow, as an analogy, could be used, how can we leverage this, let's say, the incremental formalization? Because indeed, I had that experience that if I join a wiki and it's so structured that I need like 10 pages of rules to participate, I'm usually going to give up. And maybe the technology behind it, like semantic web or whatnot, is actually brilliant, and I can do queries about everything, but I just don't want to, the barrier to entry is too high. So how can we somehow make it so very low, and yet some that each usage basically of those structuring or moving information in space, we want to go back because we're getting a little bit closer ourselves to that structuring, I guess, we're looking for.
I'd see Dene's hand. I have a quick partial answer to that, which is that the way I sort of think of it is that, well, there are two parts to it. There's how do I effect through when I see emergent structure, how do I, in a sense, formalize it? On how fast do I formalize it? And the other is, do I need to make it more manifest? So sometimes I think it's good enough that you just sort of know that there is an implicit structure there, because you sort of sense that if I try and do something with it, I'm going to break it, or I'm in making it this thing, I'm making it not something else, which was not my intent. So it's sort of difficult, and this is the joy and the difficult part: holding it in a sense, as it were, with very soft hands, so you don't crush anything for as long as you can. So that by not being premature in the formalization, you don't block out the opportunity of something else. Now, at some point, especially if you're going to go and linearize it or something, you're going to have to do that. It's inescapable. But then again, as has been alluded to when talking about the thing about different views, if you have views that sit on top of an overall structure, the objects, let's call them, the knowledge objects that you have, the hypertext nodes, they're not going anywhere. Just because in one visualization you change them doesn't mean that they have lost something they had before. You might lose that particular layout, but there are other tricks that you can do. I won't get down that rabbit hole at the moment, but there are other tricks you can do to, in a sense, save that state if it's important. I see hands up, but I was going to just ask a teaser to Rob, because I wondered how this plays with the discussion we had a while back, the two of us, about, in a sense, flying through your volume of, the work or sort of thing you're writing, and whether this has any resonance. But I see Dene.
Sorry, I was just laughing at Tom. Thank you, Tom. Yes, my cat is quite tucks me out of my linearity all the time. I was just thinking, responding to what Froda says, and it's this important concept, but still very early, right? I mean, we think, the last 40, 50 years is just a long time. We've just been thinking about this the last 50, 60 years, whatever. But in the time of print, it's nothing. We're still in the early stages. And those of us that have been around a long time, which is just about everybody in this room, has seen the way the technology has evolved and devolved, right? since the 90s, at least late 80s and 90s. And so a lot of things we could do back in the late 80s and early 90s we can't do so much anymore, but we can do something else. And so things stop and they return. And so it's interesting to see what exists today, what has been embraced, what we're rediscovering. I mean, when I show my students, when I take the students into my lab and they see we experimented with Storyspace against Twine, for example. They really liked Storyspace and the way it allowed them to name links and things like that. And they kept asking, why can't we do even multi-links? Because that technology did not endure for reasons, right? The web made it not possible, or made it very difficult. And so a lot of things the students were discovering was, why can't we do that anymore? As opposed to, why can't we do this? And I think that's another thing to think about, is what we can. That's why looking backwards and looking forward simultaneously is not a bad thing. I'll stop there, and Foda's got his hand up, and Fabienne.
I do have my hand up, and it goes back to one of Mark and my shared favorite concepts, view specs. And I think it's worth pushing a little bit on the notion that fully agree that the manual act of moving stuff about is thinking. We should not automate that. But we should also be able to use powerful different views to snap into and out of, because there may very well be things in the structure that we just haven't noticed, which is why computers are great, because we can undo. So one of the contentious things in the community is a timeline. Timeline is rough and often wrong. But if we have, let's say, concepts and books and dates and whatever, we choose to view it on a timeline that's only relative, there may very well be mistakes in there. And it's not something we would want to publish, but it may be useful for us to get a perspective and snap back to what we had earlier. Similarly, as I'm very much in dialogue with Mark, playing with my own kinds of mapping things, most of it is useless. And a lot of it is actually useful linearly, but what do you show linearly? Even today, I redesigned what I had last week with the outline. Certain things in this thing make sense, but not in that thing make sense. So I'm wondering, in addition to the core elements of spatial hypertext, to have really elegant means through which you can expand and withdraw, like we saw that Mark, you've done in, showing the connective lines or not. There's got to be even more stuff we can do with that, which should be really, really exciting. And of course, we have Mark Bernstein here, and should just overload him with things for him to program. To have, we talked about the cube earlier, Dene brought that up. It would, of course, be amazing to literally see a different angle where it's not necessarily spatial, and on and on and on. This is exciting, and I thank you again, Mark.
Fabienne.
Thank you. It's also just to show that it's not exclusive. So I have a VR headset over there, actually over there too, a bit everywhere, but also have Post-its, and I also have Legos, and I also have stuff on the wall. So it's not because one does any of those technology or use any of those concepts, then the rest is gone. It's kind of my own pleasure, to be honest. I don't know if it's efficient in terms of research or cognitively speaking, but it's not using any of those. It's using the intersection of those, or at least the combination of any of those where they make sense. So Mark, at some point you jokingly mentioned like making a grocery list, and of course it is a joke. And yet, what if you had made a better grocery list? Or what if the structure you used to make your grocery list was better? It's probably going to be impactful for the rest of your life. So that's probably not. It is silly, and yet.
No, you're absolutely right, and I was being sort of deliberately flippant in terms of I was thinking more in terms of the simplicity of the content rather than the job you do. And as I noted to you, that judging by the conversations when I get back from the shops, my shopping lists need more structure.
It might. I mean, it's the fun part also of exploring those. So I think it's worth maybe trying to do the grocery list in it. In terms of to go back a little bit on the question of structure and formalization, I don't know, maybe not gradually, but how it at least mustn't be too early. Being incremental, I think, is indeed the right way, iterating over it. And just very recently, in terms of Xerox prototyping, what we started thinking with, which I haven't documented well as per usual. It's very much in progress, but was indeed saving the state, because I think that's required, like in the sense that if you don't save the structure that you inferred from your manipulation of the data in space or otherwise, what is the point? You need to have something. So if it's incremental without having an explicit new structure, for example, naming a link or saying this is this group of concept or whatever you want, then at least the spatialization itself must be saved, so that when you shut down and you go put the card out or whatever happens, or just like the next day, I personally, same in terms of psychological experience, I want to get excited when I go back to my working space. And if I know it's saved and safe, basically, then I can go again outside and either play Lego or climb or whatever it is I want to do. But if it's not, if it's kind of so brittle, then it's stressful. I need to have some kind of way to either save the state in whatever situation it is. Ideally a good state in the sense that I have new structure and I don't necessarily have a label for it, but all those concepts are grouped in a certain way that I think there is something. So yes, we start to have little experiment now where you can save the state in the headset or save it remotely and then reload from where you were, basically, in terms of specialization.
Well, very quickly, because I see Fred's hand, but I tease apart two things there. One is that there are two sorts of state here, isn't there? One is that, you know, can I stand the whole thing back up? The more subtle one is when we often say we want to save state, but well, we know in here what we mean by that, but we often find it quite hard to articulate. No, it's because we don't want to save everything. That's the annoying thing. It turns out that if we save everything, we don't necessarily get back what we were really after. So there's some really, I think, some interesting and fun stuff to be done in that regard. Is that aside from the just put everything back as it was, but I think that's something. It's like laziness that that having computers sort of puts on us. Well, we'll get it to remember for us, and yet we sort of sometimes want a little impermanence. Not always, but in some cases we want a little perturbation in what's remembered, because that is, that leads to moments of serendipity. Fred.
Agree. So I want to show you my pen again. There's a point to it. You see the three lines? I burned two. The middle one is the twisty bit, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking it would be kind of neat if that was actually a barcode, right? Because it is so annoying. As I said last Monday, writing and drawing, if you do it with a pen, it's basically the same thing. You know, even to do the design of this, I started sketching on the back of a napkin, and this is very much inspired by you, Fabian, because most of my work doesn't really work with that. But it's just, as we move into XR, we mustn't throw away the physicality and how we live. I mean, I could imagine if this had some kind of a barcode, it can't be that hard. If you then choose to have whatever scanning mechanism, you've drawn something and you move it into your XR. I think because we're doing all our work in a very open way, open source, open this, that, and the other, we have the potential to really expand. And when I was introduced, we all introduced ourselves at this wood turning thing. I had to tell them, no, I don't do anything physical. I actually work in XR, where we have nothing to hold, right? And it is part of the ridiculous thing that, gestures are great, but seriously though, no, exactly, Fabian. In reality, it is, because your own hands are physical, your body is physical, your chair or your feet is physical, your table, so there's a question of, we want to expand our minds. And Dene said another thing, shame she's not here, last week, that I also liked. It's not extended reality, it's expansive reality. To expand, that's a verb, that's an action thing. So
I'd throw in one thing. I think it's easy to confuse two things. And sorry, this isn't in any way counter. It's a thought invoke for it. A bit like I was saying about, once you record state, and it turns out that we don't always mean quite the same thing. Is that we often, I think, we want to get everything in a place, but actually we just end up with a bigger pile of crap. We're after serendipity, But actually, really what we want is productive propinquity.
For what?
Productive propinquity, things being close to themselves, and to good reason. So you can wish for serendipity all you like. Turns out it doesn't come around that often. I mean, and so there are so many things you see people write about fostering serendipity, and they're right, and it's a laudable thing to do. But I find myself thinking on, so when I'm looking back, is it easy? How easy is it to get all these things together? I increasingly ask myself, okay, it comes with a rider, which is, well, am I just giving myself more overload? Is it a thing that I'm just going to tip everything on the floor and just hope to the heavens that something interesting is at the top of the pile, or am I doing it with a little bit more intent, which is totally distinct from thinking that no, I have created this object which I need in this space, and I would like it to move with a minimum of friction into that other space, which is a different transactional need.
Okay, cool. My hand is up, so I get to speak. Right. So here's the thing. Interaction is definitely a dimension of knowledge, right? And the way that I rediscovered this often, but this week, was I now, in my own little map, I have a Command F, a find in the map. Why I didn't have it before, I have no idea. Design-wise, it could have been many things. Maybe it was lines coming from the find area to whatever has it. But the way it's implemented is you type in Mark Anderson, everything that doesn't say Mark Anderson or have Mark Anderson definition goes away. Obvious, simple. But here's the thing, when you then click to remove that find, so everything is visible, or you do Command F again, it keeps selecting those items, right? I think the ability to grab something is really, really important. I didn't realize until today when it worked how important that is, because now I have arbitrarily chosen that these things are of value for me, either to move, hide, delete, modify, whatever. So what I mean, Mark, is we're kind of polarizing ourselves as a joke, you and Fabienne and me. I think we all have the notion of save something, not everything. But the more stuff of our world that is there that we can draw on demand, I agree with. And it's so lovely to hear you talk about the visual interface. We shouldn't overload with all kinds of nonsense. Completely agree. But that thing of being able to, wow, it wasn't even designed. It was just the way the coding turned out for that interaction. Yes, over to Fabian.
Yeah, it's also to go back on the saving the state. It is indeed, Mark, a shortcut. We save. I don't think saving the state is possible. I was having a joke over lunch, like, how do you make samosa? Then you take all the fillings and whatnot, but then you also need to have an oven, and then you need to invent electricity, and then to invent the universe. So when we save the state, we don't save the state. We save whatever we think will be enough to indeed kickstart the thinking process again, maybe with serendipity, with whatever amount we're comfortable with. I know that when I have my notebook, I write the date. I nearly never use the date back, but sometimes I do kind of remember where I was physically, what was the music I was listening to, which has nothing to do with the notes I was writing. And yet somehow it kind of gives me some bigger context rather than just what was written. So saving the state, I actually don't know what to do, how to do that. Technically speaking, we do basically the minimum, which is those little code or text snippets are floating in space. Where do we put them? Do we save the interface? Do we save, yes, saving the state is very much a shortcut. And besides saving the entire universe, I don't know how to do that. And I definitely don't know how to save the universe.
I think, well, that's our job, isn't it? Saving the universe, starting with the Earth. This is such a key information problem. It's exactly that. I talked about it in terms of compression last week. What needs to be saved, what needs to be held, what needs to be grabbable, what should be in the back of your mind, and how should you access it? Really important things. Now, it's 1 minute till the keynote. I am desperately hoping for something useful in the XR space from Apple, my overlords. Sorry, Fabian, I know you feel a bit different. Saving states, though, I think is really, really important for the basic stuff, because I could imagine, a slimmed down hypertextual 3D spatial environment, you put around everything, you spend an hour organizing, and you realize this rubbish, which is, of course, part of the process. So if you then even manually say, okay, hang on, I did my first thing. Now you completely change it again. To be able to not necessarily undo and go back, but to snap back and forth. It's like, well, hang on, what did I actually have earlier? It is really, really fascinating. So I mean, the thing, Mark has been pushing me a lot lately to let's just have something in space. And that's something that we have right now is the basic little text. And Fabian, I hope you aren't mad at me in our Slack. I've given you a few suggestions for slightly polishing them further. Because the feeling of this is
I'll just quickly note for the record. I mean, it is interesting that people talk about this sort of going back thing, and you know, it's only recently that I was able to play with VKB, and I started thinking about, yeah, that's quite interesting what they were doing with this sort of timeline scrubber. The idea being that you could sort of go back and watch in a sense the map emerging. I think there's something interesting in that, and again, it just shows, you know, all the research money disappears off, and suddenly things just die, because I'm sure that had things continued there, we might have seen some more development of that. I don't think it's something that anything has to have, but I think it's interesting. I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's separate to the notion of sort of laying out information in a timeline. It's just this. And it's slightly gets to what Fabian was alluding to. Well, okay, well, if I want to capture the state, well, maybe, you know, can I just, you know, rather than just trash the whole thing and start over, maybe can I move myself back a while without me needing to track what all those changes are? Now, obviously, you only get what's tracked. And what you tend to find out is actually the thing you thought you were going back to is something that didn't get saved or wasn't implicit in the way that you thought it was, but it's still interesting to do.
And of course, then you get to the notion of not only delta in time, but delta with other people. Like I could have, you know, we don't even know how to visualize. I don't know how to visualize that. Maybe sorry, the WW thing has started. Such as going back in time. Yeah, absolutely agree. But I mean, at some point, we are here going to have a shared map of the knowledge we have in our community. That's an XR. This is basically done. The amount of work Fabian has done over the excuse me, the first 6 months now is staggering. Right now, we have to be a bit Steve Jobs, joking, to package them into useful experiences. Right. One of the experiences, the one that I'm kind of spearheading now, is the simple, elegant. And Fabian, please don't kill me over this either. But I really think that one of our demos has to feel like the first iPhone. Elegant, intimate, and underpowered. Right? Just so you go in and you get to grips with it literally. Then after that, presentation of all the power beyond that. Because let's say we have this shared environment of knowledge. Then what, right? You've made that already, Fabian. You know, I would love to see Rob come in and mess up mine completely, put in weird stuff, and then somehow look at the difference. And finally, for me anyway, Mark said a few weeks ago that one interesting use of AI would be for the AI to learn everything you yourself have written. So when you come across new knowledge, it'll tell you where it disagrees with you. You know, where in the paper is there a clearly different definition? You know, spatially, to have one level of support like that, yeah, really cool. Anyway, I love you guys. I'm grateful for today. And I look forward to next Monday, where you all need to have little flags to wave along. I hope you'll all be here. Oh, Mark Bernstein had to go. That's a shame. It's good to see him. Peter, welcome to the community. Very nice to see you. And of course, as you want to speak up in the future or not, that's entirely up to you. Please also be aware if you're late or have to leave early, that's entirely normal in this community. We all know people, some of us have lives, not all of us. So anything else before we adjourn?
Just quickly, if anyone, I think the keynote, well, certainly if it's not already available, just ask me. And if anyone wants any more information on papers, I have many references. So just ask me.
That's a really good point, actually, because on our Future Text Lab website, the listing, you know, becomes the record. So Mark will send me all kinds of goodies. I'll put it up there on the page in addition to the transcript analysis and so on. So yeah, let's make it complete. All right, I'm off to enjoy Tim Cook walking around in trainers, even though he's a billionaire. Bye, guys.